Evolutionary Theory. We'll be right back and continue exactly where we just left off. Chlorophyll and hemoglobin. Be right back.
You are listening to Antimatter Radio from West Lafayette, Indiana, the show about everything, where conspiracy becomes science, where the natural becomes supernatural, where the brave new world slave becomes divinely inspired. Conspiracy, ancient history, human origins, consciousness, parapsychology, advanced beings, spirituality, meditation, New World Order, telementation. Antimatterradio.com.
So getting back to our introduction, what we have found so far is that the world consists of creatures with different codes, and the patterns and arrangements of the codes repeat as if little pieces of patterns are mixed together in various ways to create different morphologies, or different structures, in other words, of different creatures. So that's right. We have exact same patterns of DNA showing up from species to species to species. It's like you had a big Tinker Toy, say you had 10,000 Tinker Toys, and you made a huge structure out of it, but then took big segments, say you took like 100 big segments of it and rearranged them to make another structure. Okay, but so you've still got a lot of the same patterns in there, but all rearranged. That's exactly how DNA works from species to species. Now, for example, I'm looking here at, some people will probably cream me for, I'm going to read an article from the San Francisco Chronicle. I just didn't feel like looking up anything more technical for time reasons. So somebody will probably say, oh, you read a San Francisco Chronicle article, your whole talk is so untechnical and not scholarly of the journals, so therefore I'm going to disregard the whole thing, which is a total ad hominem attack. But anyway, let them do it, because if they do that, that means they just didn't want to hear the empirical findings anyways, and they were just interested in keeping their paradigms rather than letting their views change with the evidence. So I'm looking at an article here of mice and men. Striking similarities at the DNA level could aid research. December 5, 2002. Sabin Russell, Chronicle medical writer. The fifth paragraph in here says they're comparing human and mice DNA. Among the findings are that mice and human beings both carry about 30,000 genes. Differences within these individual genes, the precise sequences of the four-letter DNA code, spell out the obvious differences between the two mammalian species. On a letter-by-letter basis, the genes are 85% the same. So this is just very much common knowledge. I didn't think I had to go to, Science Journal at sciencemag.org or something to get some. I thought this was just fine to just cite this to you. I didn't think I needed a textbook or something else. So this is so my Tinker Toy example is, that's what this mouse to human DNA is all about. So there's some we're more similar to as humans, and some we're less similar to. Now there's going to be a species out there that we're most similar to, and that's, of course, I think they still say the bonobo chimpanzee. I still think that's the one that they say is that we're so chimpanzees, just for this, you can think of it. So specifically though, bonobos, I believe it was. I mean, so there has to be one that's most similar. Now, the one that we're most similar to are the ones that the evolutionists are going to say is our ancestor. So it could have been any. If our DNA patterns were most similar to a dog, they would say that's our ancestor. And not surprisingly, they started to think way back before we even mapped the human genome. And back then they were saying our genetics were similar. I guess there were some reasons for them to do that. But just from our morphology, the similarities in our structures, the chimpanzees and the apes are most similar in appearance to us, so therefore the DNA is obviously going to be the most similar as well. So there's nothing strange going on here. There's absolutely no evidence for any kind of evolution. And any of this, I guess it's a little early in the talk for me to say that here, because I want to go through all my mountains of evidence and so forth. But I mean, it's worth saying. I mean, there's a lot of evolutionists use this kind of stuff to say this is evidence for evolution, but of course it's not. It's just evidence of similarity. To say, on the other hand, oh, there's this progression through millions of years is a whole other issue. You have to derive the empirical evidence for it. So on that note, what I've just described is the world consisting of codes of creatures, basically reproducing codes, reproducing bodies that have codes that are reproducing as well, with slight changes from creature to creature. But overall, the morphology is the same. Okay, we don't have species. We don't see species changes going on in the world. And the evolutionists say, oh, that's because it's too slow. Of course. So that's in other words, we're supposed to believe this invisible process going on that they want to demand exists to us, and they call it science, even though they're discussing an invisible process. And see, what they do then is they say, no, it's not invisible. There was a moth in England who the soot or whatever on the trees in England in a certain area made the trees change color from this factory that polluted the part of a forest or something. I'm trying to remember this story. I read it years ago. This actually happened. And the moths actually changed color. They adapted to change color to blend in. They were one color and then they changed color to blend in with the new color of the trees from the pollution. So that's evidence for the evolution of creatures. This is you go and look at your textbooks and anthropology, and they'll say this is the evidence for the process of evolution, this change. Now, there's a small problem. You can produce that in the lab, okay? I mean, there's famous examples of producing fruit flies and so forth that have all kinds of different characteristics. We can see it going on in the world. This is natural selection. It is empirical fact. Natural selection is. Now, on the other hand, evolution is a totally different story, okay? Because when you talk about that moth in England, the moth just changed into another kind of moth. It just changed its color. The moth was still a moth. The problem is that evolution is not about moths changing into moths and horses changing into other kinds of horses with different color fur or something. Evolution is, how do you get a bug to turn into a person or a deer to turn into a horse? Now, that has never been observed anywhere, and we're asked to believe from our evolutionist friends that this happens. But the problem is as I have the very strict discipline on this show of being a very hard-nosed empirical researcher and admitting openly and shouting out to the world, if I'm ever just talking in terms of philosophy and non-empirical evidence, to make sure that is known, but otherwise to always use hard-nosed empirical attitudes, perspectives, I can't accept the moth as being any kind of evidence for evolution, and I can't accept the evolutionists wanting me to believe in this invisible process called species changing into one another, because it's not observable. It's an invisible issue. Invisibles are very dangerous in science because they smack of philosophy, not science. If you're asked to believe in something you can't see, and invisible. And the invisible I'm referring to here is one species changing into another. Nobody's observed that in the natural world on planet Earth. So to say that it happens is a huge, risky, non-scientific philosophy. Now, the problem is a lot of people say, oh, well, come on, we just know what happens. Natural selection does this. Natural selection is the evidence for evolution, the engine behind it. Okay. Now, this gets into this punctuated equilibrium issue that I've pointed out on many shows. The way the reasoning, here's the problem with natural selection and why it is, if you posit that natural selection is the mechanism behind evolution, you have just contradicted yourself and you've brought the whole theory down for the following reasons. Point one, the modern conception of evolution uses natural selection as the mechanism. Point 2. It has been discovered that punctuated equilibrium is what is found in the fossils. Okay, in other words, you don't have gradual evolution. You have long periods of things being the same, and then bam, with no observable change, things change. Okay, all of a sudden you've got deer and then horses. This is not my belief. This is what absolute top world famous anthropologists and evolutionists and paleontologists like Stephen Jay Gould have said. He invented the theory, based on what he said he saw in the fossils, called it punctuated equilibrium. And now, it's too early for me to get into this right now, but when we start talking about our